Okay. I know this is the oldest and most far-fetched situation imaginable, but it happened. I wish I could tell you in some sophisticated or unusual way how I found out my wife was cheating on me, but I can't. It all happened like the old cliche of a bad story. I work for an automobile parts company. I make brakes. Someone has to do it, and I'm one of the lucky ones. From 4 to midnight every day, 5 days a week, for 8 hours, I run one of the most archaic machines you've ever seen. I wear eye protection, earplugs, steel-toed boots, and a denim apron. Every day I fulfill my quota, and if I'm lucky, I get a bonus at the end of the year. I have a nice 3-bedroom house, a beautiful wife, and 2 children, both in elementary school. After 12 years of marriage, everything has been going well, until now. We have 5 stations that mount shoes. All of them run on compressed air. In 8 years, we have not had any problems with the equipment. Today, in the middle of a shift, the compressed air system froze up. The air used to run all of our machines must be completely dry. It is filtered and dehumidified by automatic equipment that never fails. Well, almost never. Tonight, the dehumidifier system did not release the accumulated moisture. I'm not a scientist, so all I know is that when moisture and high-pressure air meet, freezing occurs and everything stops. Instead of sitting this one out, they sent the whole crew home. Without paychecks, of course. You could say my whole life was ruined by the high humidity. When I opened the bedroom door, all I saw was a big hairy back bouncing up and down on my wife, Marcy. Of course, I instinctively turned on the overhead light when I realized Marcy was awake. Damn it, Danny. What the hell are you doing home? I expected her to lose her temper, apologize, and be embarrassed, but all I got was a pissed-off bitch. What the hell is going on? Oh, don't be such an idiot. You know exactly what's going on. I'm sorry you had to see it, but if you had come home when you were supposed to, this never would have happened. He never would have shown up here, or I never would have seen him. And then the hairy back turned and was now looking at me with a smirk. Marcy pulled the sheets up in a half-joking attempt to maintain modesty. My big mistake was grabbing the guy. When he got out of bed, he was much bigger than when he was lying down. For my foolish enthusiasm, I was rewarded with 2 very hard punches to the ribs. I didn't manage to hit him in time and was lying on the floor, grunting and trying to catch my breath. I don't know exactly, but I think at this point I received a blow to the head that rendered me unconscious. Anyway, I ended up in a hospital emergency room where some medical technician was bandaging my ribs. Marcy was sitting in a chair near the examination table, looking disgusted. The technician finished and left the room. Marcy, who was that guy and what was he doing in our house? His name is Tony. He's a friend of mine and I invited him home. You were doing it with him. You did it with him in our bed. Our kids slept in the hallway. Yeah, I know. If you hadn't made such a fuss, they never would have woken up. I had to ask my sister to watch them so I could bring you here. What the hell was he doing there? How many times are you going to ask the same question? We were having sex. We were fornicating. Is that really so hard to understand? Does this happen regularly, or was this the only time? Tony and I had been together for about 6 months. We tried to keep it a secret. We don't usually come home, but I couldn't find a babysitter. Are you done yet? No, I'm not done yet. Danny, you're a good father and a good husband, but Tony is great in bed. I don't see any reason for us to break up just because he's in the public eye. I promise we'll never see each other at home again. It's not fair to you or the kids. I'm sorry, Marcy, this is unacceptable. It's going to stop now. Danny, if you try to interfere in any way with my relationship with Tony, I can guarantee you'll regret it. You just got your ass kicked and Tony didn't even break a sweat. I assure you, it will happen again. If you do or say anything, everyone we know will know that your wife is seeing another man and you're too weak to stop it. All our friends and neighbors will be the first to know. I'll make sure your family knows what a pathetic loser you are. The guys you work with will start calling you a cuckold. Think twice, Danny. Your life's gonna be hell. I bet even your kids will be ashamed of you. Do you care what they think of you? Would you make yourself look like a whore just to put me down? I'll do it if I have to, but I bet you won't risk it. Tony thinks you're a coward, and I think he's right. You're going to have to learn to live with that, Danny boy. Who the hell is this guy? Where does he work? He doesn't work, Danny. He owns Continental Classics, a luxury car store on Lancaster Pike. You know, the place you always wanted to go but never got to. That's it? Danny, he's richer than you. He's smarter than you. And he's better than you in bed. He's also stronger looking and better with his fists than you. Why don't you marry him if he's so great? That's why I keep you around, honey. Tony doesn't like children, and I have no intention of giving up mine to be with him. You play the part of housewife and daddy, and all the love goes to Tony. Why is that so hard for you to understand? Am I supposed to like that state of affairs? You don't have a choice. Either you accept it or the whole world will know what a loser you are. By the way, I'm going to move all your stuff into the guest room. I guess we won't have to share a bed anymore now that the cat's out of the bag. I watched Marcy get up to leave. I was glad she was leaving. Just out of curiosity, honey, who watched the kids when you were with Tony? Karen usually looked after them, but every once in a while she would drop them off at your parents' house. By the way, it was Karen who introduced me to Tony. I mentally thanked Karen as Marcy left the room. The next morning I was discharged. Marcy wasn't there. I had the choice of calling someone or taking a cab. The cab won. The kids were at school and Marcy wasn't home. All my clothes and personal belongings were piled on the guest bed. Surely Todd and Terry would have questions about these preparations. I was going to leave it to Marcy to explain everything. It took me less than an hour to get my new living space in order. During that time, all sorts of ideas ran through my head. There was no question of everything going the way Marcy had planned. The first thing I did was go to the basement and get my old cell phone recorder. It only worked with a landline, but I had no choice. Marcy used her cell phone for most of her calls. It only took me 20 minutes to plug it in and hide it behind some old paint cans. That was the first step. I felt awful, but well enough to go back to work. They gave me pain pills, but I wasn't thrilled with the idea of taking them and then operating machinery. Instead, I took a couple of potent Tylenols. One thing Marcy had really miscalculated on was my relationship with the guys I was working with. I told them everything that had happened the night before. They all had their own ideas, some good and some bad. It's nice to know that friends will be there for you when you need them. We had an 8-hour shift ahead of us, and each of us was going to spend it thinking of ways to make things right. In the middle of the shift, we stopped for lunch. Okay, anyone have any ideas? Glenn spoke first. I have no idea, but I have a cousin who works for the son of a bitch. He handles all the car parts. As far as I know, he hates DeMarco. If you need information on businesses, buildings, or work shifts, he can help you out. That will definitely help, Glenn. Is there anything else? Danny, I have 2 shotguns and 2 pistols. You can have either one of them. None of them are registered, so don't worry. Thanks, Barry, but that sounds a little more radical than I expected. Well, hell, then you don't even want to hear my idea. Freddie chuckled slightly. Tell us, Freddie. Come on, tell us. I was thinking we could tie him to a tree with his legs spread apart and build a fire, Indian style, between his legs. Everyone liked Freddie's idea, but it was unanimously rejected. Kyle was the only one who didn't suggest anything, so we all just watched him while we ate our lunches. What? Don't look at me like that. Yes, I have an idea, but it's a bit formulaic. Spit it out, Kyle. I remember reading somewhere about a prison in Arizona where they dressed all the pedophiles in pink jumpsuits. It was supposed to be humiliating. I know this Tony isn't a pedophile, but something like that would embarrass the hell out of him. You mean if you put a pink jumpsuit on him, he wouldn't take it off? I was thinking if you could get in there, tie him up, and then spray him with pink paint. That would help. But he'll know who did it. First, we have to render him unconscious and then leave him tied to a chair until he's found. How? What do you have in mind? I can get a stun gun. All you have to do is sneak up on him and shoot him. You say it's easier than it is. How do we get to him when he's alone? And how do we get close enough so he doesn't recognize it? I don't have all the answers. I just thought it was an idea. The doorbell rings, and I'm back to another 4 hours of working on cars. My quota for that night was low, so the rest of the guys pulled up. When I got home, Marcy was already in bed. At least she kept her word not to bring home that asshole. I had no idea what I was going to do. Most of the things the guys and I talked about were like high school pranks. I might as well have hung a burning bag of dog poop on his door. I needed real revenge. When I got up, it was already noon. The kids were at school and I could hear Marcy moving around the house. I took a quick shower, shaved, and headed out the door. Good morning, husband. Don't you have a kiss for your wife? I stood at the sink with my hand on my hip and smirked. I turned and walked out the door. His flippant comment didn't deserve a response. I needed to eat and be alone. I spent the rest of the day killing time. I tried to figure out what I could do to my wife's sexual partner without doing much harm to myself. In the evening, I needed to finish work and start packing. I decided not to eat at home. It was the only time I had with the boys, but I could no longer bring myself to eat whatever Marcy was cooking. Before I knew it, it was time to go to work. Things were pretty normal until lunchtime. Danny, I have a stun gun in my car. I don't know if you'll be able to use it, but at least you'll have it for self-defense. Kyle looked proud of himself. Don't forget to pick it up before you go home. Have you ever used the damn thing? No, we can try it. Who wants to volunteer? The only answer was a chorus of groans around the table. No one had any new ideas, but everyone was ready to support whatever I came up with. I felt better knowing I had friends. When I arrived, everything was normal at home. The night would be a short one for me. Working the night shift breaks the habit of sleep, especially on weekends. I got up earlier than usual. Todd and Terry jumped at the chance to spend time at Chuck E. Cheese's. Marcy didn't seem to mind at all, especially when I told her we'd be gone all day. Danny, I need you to take a vacation next week. Tony's friend Wally is coming in from Detroit, and we're going on a cruise for 3 nights and 4 days to Cancun. If you can't make it, maybe your parents can. Let me get this straight. You're going on a sea cruise with 2 guys? That sounds a little scrappy, even for you. Don't be rude, Danny. It doesn't suit you. Wally's going to live with Karen. They've been old friends for years. Oh. Gee, I guess it's okay then. I tried to be as sarcastic as possible. I would be sure to thank Karen later. Of course, I started the day too early. To kill time before Chucky's opened, we went to Hobby Lobby, not far from home. The kids were old enough to assemble most of the plastic models on the shelves. The end results weren't too impressive, but they had a lot of fun. I let them explore hundreds of boxes and wandered around marveling at all the junk that was available to creative homemakers. I think if Marcy had loved needlework, she wouldn't have brought home that furry gorilla. But now it was too late. My eyes lit up when I discovered rows and rows of designer paint in spray cans. There they were, 6 beautiful pink paint cans. They didn't have as much paint in them as the cans from Lowe's or Home Depot, but they were pink. It was the only place I'd ever seen paint that color in an aerosol can. Of course, I took that as a sign and bought all 6 cans. Todd got the set with the monster truck and Terry chose the tow truck. I didn't even know they made plastic models of tow trucks. Before I left, I also bought a package of 10 plastic cable wraps. They were about 18 inches long and looked like they would be enough for the whole job. By then, the Chuck E. Cheese was ready to go. The guys killed about 4 hours and ate 2 pizzas before they burned out. We grabbed a package of cheap bread and headed to Pandora Park. The ducks ate everything in the first 10 minutes, but we hung out there for a couple more hours before heading to my parents' house. Mom and Dad were happy to have us over for dinner and to spend the evening. Todd and Terry spent most of the evening in front of the TV, and I took advantage of that time to bring Dad up to speed on the Marcy thing. I realized I was telling him what was going on before Marcy did. She was threatening to do the same thing I was. Heck, it almost made her threats meaningless. Dad promised they'd be there to take care of the kids no matter what. That would make it a lot easier. I didn't want the boys to get hurt because of the situation. Around 9 o'clock, I called Marcy to let her know that we would be spending the night at my parents' house. I picked up the car. After a hearty breakfast at IHOP, we returned home and found Marcy still in bed. I immediately started the mower and started in the backyard next to the bedrooms. Todd and Terry were itching to get to work on their models, even though it was a beautiful day outside. I let them go. I decided to work on the lawn all day. I needed to trim the edges and do some pruning. It wasn't going as fast as usual because I stopped often to chat. I had a pair of excellent head shears, but decided to borrow them from Mike Fielding, the neighbor across the street. His wife, Mary, was one of the biggest gossipers in the neighborhood. I explained to Mike that there might be unfamiliar cars parked near the house because Marcy's male friends were coming to visit. Everything should be fine, as long as they didn't get drunk and rowdy. If that happened, I would call the police. It was difficult for me to control the situation since I worked nights. And Larry Finley was on the board of directors of the local church. I borrowed a candle key from him and apologized for Marcy's recent wild behavior. Of course, I wanted to know what he meant. Larry was more curious than Mary Fielding. 10 minutes later, I had enough material for a month. I didn't break for lunch and finished my work around 4 in the afternoon. After a quick shower, I went to Rosie's Cantina and ordered the most expensive dish on the menu. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but it was definitely delicious. I spent the rest of the day with my brother Dave and his family. Dad had already told him what was going on. I spent the night on his couch. My wife had a great plan. She was going to force me to comply by threatening to find out I was a cuckold. If I refused to consent and support her infidelity, she would make my life miserable. It was an interesting idea, but it had a lot of holes in it. In less than a week, I told everyone what was going on. That negated her threat. It also managed to make her look like an even bigger slut than I had imagined. I don't think she expected any reaction. The next day after lunch, I stopped by the house to change for work, and a furious Marcy was waiting for me. "What the hell have you been telling the neighbors?" Karen said. "You've been telling everyone like I run a brothel here at night." "Oh shit, that's not true, Marcy. I just explained to them that you can entertain men while I'm at work and that they shouldn't get excited about it." "Well, it doesn't work that way. Who else have you talked to?" "With everyone. I decided to tell them before I told you. It was easier that way. I didn't say anything to your parents or your sisters. You should probably do that before word gets out to them." "Damn it, Danny. You're making me look like a whore." "Well, fair enough. You were going to make me look like a cuckold." "Bastard." "I'm sorry, honey, but I have to go to work." I managed to spend some time with the kids before leaving. The hardest part was that I didn't get to spend the time with them that I wanted to. Glenn had the best news of the evening. Continental Classics was closing at 9 o'clock on Thursday night, so Tony could take care of Friday's payroll in person. He hated being disturbed during payroll, so even the janitor was gone. Kyle took a few minutes and showed him how to use the taser. No one volunteered to try it out on themselves. The plan was taking shape. If I got caught, and I was counting on it, I was facing jail time. I didn't care. Tony DeMarco was going to be humiliated. If I was arrested, I'd make sure all the newspapers and TV stations knew all about it. Any such publicity would crush him, or at least make him so angry that he would do something stupid. For the next few days, I came home only to sleep, shower, and change clothes. I hadn't eaten at home since the first day. Finally, Thursday came. I managed to get my truck to run out of battery and Kyle picked me up. The plant manager never really bothered the brake guys much. As long as we met quotas and the quality was good, they left us alone. One thing I liked was the OSHA work requirements. In apron, gloves, and welding goggles, we all looked pretty much the same. At 8:30, I slipped out the back door. The guys were taking turns working my area. Of course, one of their spots might have been vacant, but no one cared. Restroom breaks were commonplace and never monitored. The main thing was to give the illusion that I never left. Around 9 o'clock, someone did a quick check before turning off the lights. 10 minutes later, I put on latex gloves and walked out of the restroom and into the semi-dark office. His desk was across from the display case, so he was standing with his back to the door. It seemed to be easier than I expected. There was a computer in front of him, and he was picking at an old adding machine with a paper tape. He didn't hear me approach. I hit Tony right in the back of the head with the stun gun. His body jerked, and I thought he was going to keel over, so I hit him again. This time, he took a couple jerks and then relaxed. Great. I put 2 plastic bandages on each leg and 2 on each arm. I brought out an old tie to blindfold him. He was very cooperative. I pushed the chair up against the glass window of the showroom. When his men came to work in the morning, they would have a perfect view of him. It turned out a nice pink color, but I had to use a lot more paint than intended. The clothes absorbed the paint as fast as I sprayed it. It took at least 3 coats on each area to make it look the way I wanted it to. There was enough paint, but barely. It looked really pretty in the pink color. When I was done, I packed it all up neatly. I hoped Tony would wake up while I was decorating it, but he didn't move. I also planned to remove the bandage from his neck before I left. I glanced at the clock a few times. I was meeting my allotted time, but I still wanted Tony to be awake before I left. After 5 minutes, I started to worry. I tried to check his pulse, but to no avail. Perhaps I couldn't feel it because of the latex gloves. I took off the glove and tried again. There was still no pulse. I tried to feel for a pulse on my neck like they do on TV. I still couldn't find anything. I took off the blindfold and touched his eyeball with the tip of the pencil. He didn't blink. There was no reflex. Needless to say, I panicked. I had enough sense to put on a latex glove and remove anything I might have touched. I stashed the tie in my pocket and then cut all the plastic ties. As I pulled them off, traces of pink paint were visible. It looked odd. The white fur under the tie made it look like a pink raccoon. I took another minute to make sure I hadn't missed anything, then got to work. On the way to the shop, I threw all the junk I had with me, including the stun gun, down the drain pipe. 10 minutes later, I was making brake pads again. No one noticed my absence. As soon as the shift was over, I told the guys what had happened. They were all prop guys, so I was sure no one would say anything. Freddie was very impressed. None of them looked worried. Kyle drove me home, and we both mentally noted what time he dropped me off. I didn't get the usual amount of sleep. Around 10 o'clock, Marcy burst into my room. "What the hell did you do? What did you do, you little bastard?" Of course, I turned and looked at her perplexed. "What the hell are you talking about, woman?" "Tony's dead. Karen called and said he was found dead in his office this morning. I think you had something to do with it, and I'm going to make sure you pay for it, you bastard." That was the second time in 5 minutes he'd called me a bastard. It was clear I wasn't going to get any more sleep, so I stumbled out of bed and headed for the bathroom. I was in no hurry to face the Wicked Witch of the East, so I took a long, hot shower and took my time shaving. I even put on some aftershave just to tease my caring wife. I never got to the coffee pot. There was a tall black man standing in the living room, talking to Marcy. His hair was very short, and he was wearing a dark suit. The bitch had called the police. There was no doubt about it. I shook my head and headed to the kitchen for my first cup of the day. Marcy smiled wryly as I settled into my favorite chair. My uninvited guest sat down as well. "Mr. Mercer, my name is Detective Darnell Green with an E. I'm here about the death of Anthony DeMarco last night. Your wife said you and Mr. DeMarco had a disagreement last week, and I was wondering if I could ask you a few questions." "Of course, I have no objections, but not here." "What do you mean?" "If you want to talk, let's do it in your office instead of at my house. Is that okay with you?" I couldn't help but notice the frown on Marcy's face. I was sure she was counting on being part of the discussion. "My car or yours, Mr. Mercer?" "Right. I have other things to do, so I'll see you there. Any special offices?" "Second floor at the back of the building. Room 206. Turn right when you get off the elevator. I'll see you soon." Marcy watched me put on my shoes with annoyance. I didn't have time to finish my coffee and poured it down the sink. As I walked out the door, I turned and smiled. "I think you're getting what you wanted, honey." "What are you talking about? What the hell do you mean, Danny?" 10 minutes later, he was sitting with Detective Green on the second floor of the municipal building. For the next hour, Detective Green asked all the right questions and I got all the right answers. I tried to behave tactfully without ignoring or coddling him. Of course, I had to admit that I had a motive, but there was no way to do anything about it. It was a serious situation, but I tried to be sympathetic and not seem like a smartass. I think he appreciated the fact that I made his job easier, even if I didn't have an answer for him. The most interesting part of the conversation was learning that Tony had died of some kind of heart problem. He had been fitted with a pacemaker a couple years ago, and I guess it didn't mix well with the stun gun. Of course, they knew about the stun gun because of the marks on his neck. I felt bad about Tony's death, but I was also glad. Detective Green gave me the usual "don't leave town" speech and informed me that he would contact me after he checked my alibi. I never thought I'd need an alibi. It was exciting. We parted on good terms. I felt like Darnell Green was on my side. He made me feel warm to my soul. I grabbed a snack and watched the news. There was a story about the death of a local businessman. It mentioned that there were no relatives in the area. I emptied my bank accounts and then had a hearty breakfast. There was plenty to do at home. Marcy wasn't home when I returned. It took me 30 minutes to drag all my stuff into the bedroom and all of Marcy's stuff into the guest room. The guest room had a small closet and dresser. I stacked all the stuff on the bed so she could put it away. I checked the phone recorder in the basement but found nothing important. I gathered all the bank and insurance papers and other important papers. I was glad that Marcy's Volvo would be registered in my name. It would make things easier. I put everything in a folder under the front seat of my truck. I called work and took a 2-week vacation. A few hours later, my lovely wife showed up. She seemed surprised to find me home. It was time to get things in order. I smiled as I led her into the guest room. "Seven, what the hell is this? Who the hell do you think you are?" His answer was a wide grin. "Answer me, what the hell is going on?" "Marcy, from now on, I'll be staying in the master bedroom. You can stay in the guest room. I suggest you start folding your clothes. Anything that isn't in the closet or on the dresser by dinner time will be thrown out. Any questions?" "I can't fit my stuff in this small closet, and I'm not going to stay in this room. What the hell do you mean by throw away?" "Nah, if you can't fit things in your closet or dresser, then you don't need them." "That's not going to happen, Danny. I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but it's not going to work. You're dead. I suggest you start putting things in order. If you have any more questions, I'll come back later." "Bastard." That's the third time he's called me a bastard today. I must be doing something right. While Marcy was busy in the guest room, I left her purse on the kitchen table. I took my time gathering everything I needed. First, I took her cell phone and then her car keys. From my wallet, I took out her driver's license, all of her credit cards, debit cards, and money. Everything that was left, I put back in storage. I took the title to his car out of the van and drove the Volvo across town to a friend who owned a dealership. I sold it to him directly, at a good price, with the agreement that I would sell it wholesale out of town. Even with the payment, I got several $1,000s in my pocket. I was on my way to Taco Bell to get something to eat when suddenly my cell phone rang. "You son of a bitch, what did you do with my cell phone and where the hell is my car?" I was glad he didn't call me a bitch again. He was calling from his home phone. This was a good test. I could check the recorder when I got home. "I'm sorry, honey. I had to get some money to hire a lawyer to defend me against murder charges. I promised to buy you another car as soon as I get out of jail." He was still insulting me when I hung up and turned off the phone. After that conversation, I decided a lawyer was a good idea. No matter what happened, I wasn't going to stay married. But I would have to wait because I was the next one to ask for it. Todd and Terry were home when I arrived. I went straight to my kids and ignored Marcy. I glanced at her a couple of times and realized she wasn't very happy. The boys couldn't wait to show me the models they had put together. When Marcy started cooking dinner, I headed for the guest room. All my clothes were on the bed. All of Marcy's clothes were in the master bedroom. I grinned to myself, but decided not to resist. She was tough and determined at this point. Marcy told the boys to wash up for dinner, and I went to the guest room to put my things away again. I would have loved to throw all their stuff away, but it seemed too childish. Tonight, I treated myself to a meal at Red Lobster. Money wasn't a problem because I still had money left over after giving a deposit to the divorce attorney. The shrimp and lobster combo was great, but the cheese rolls were still my favorite. After I finished eating, I turned on my cell phone again. I was hoping one of the guys from work or Detective Green would call me. No such luck as the first call was from my wife. "Danny, how do I go to the grocery store? We need milk and a few other things." "I'll drive you when I get home. Try to get groceries on Saturdays when I'm not working. It'll be easier for me if you don't have to do the shopping yourself." "Oh, I have another call. I gotta go. I'll talk to you when I get home." The second call was from Kyle. Detective Green talked to the whole team, individually and as a group. All the stories checked out. Tom Tingle, the floor manager, was most supportive. He insisted that there was no way I could have missed work. He kept a very close eye on all his employees and could guarantee that I had been there all night. I knew he wasn't that smart. If some CSI wanted to prove that I killed Tony DeMarco, I'm sure he could do it. I felt like nobody cared. I got home just in time to put the kids to bed. Marcy was sitting on the couch with a glass of wine. I grabbed a cold Foster's from the refrigerator and made myself comfortable in the chair. The TV wasn't on, so I decided now would be a good time to talk to Marcy. "So, Marcy, how's the plan to turn me into a wuss and a cuckold going?" That was the end of the conversation before it could begin. He finished his wine, got up and went to his room. I thought he wanted to talk. Guess I was wrong. I grabbed my beer and went to check the recorder. The first call was to his sister. There was no cover-up. Apparently, Marge knew all about the affair with Tony and supported Marcy in every way possible. That was good to know. The next call was to Marcy's mom, and that was a little different. Mom had no idea what was going on. Her daughter convinced her that Tony was a friend of Karen's and that I was jealous because I had been trying to have sex with Karen for years. Tony gave me a lecture, and I got angry. He never said I killed him, but I'm sure he guessed it. He called the cell phone company to see if they could be forced to replace the phone he took from me, but to no avail. He then called traffic to report that I had taken his driver's license. He was told to report it to the police. She called the bank to ask for a replacement credit card, but was told the account was closed. I must say, she was a very busy girl. The last call on the answering machine was addressed to Karen. Karen lived a few houses away, so I have no idea why they used the phone instead of meeting. Of course, it was for my benefit. I learned two important things from that call: that Wally was still on his way from Detroit and that Marcy was going to lay low until he arrived. The next morning, the boys and I got up early. We were out of the house before Marcy woke up. We got home after lunch, and Marcy insisted that I take her to the grocery store. She needed things, and since she no longer had a car or driver's license, I had to take care of it. That night, while she was making dinner, I checked the tape recorder. Wally had arrived, and the first person he called was Marcy. It was an interesting conversation. He believed everything Marcy told him and vowed revenge. Wally and Tony had grown up together, and he didn't want to leave it that way. He gave Marcy the phone number where he was staying and told her to call him the next day when she had a chance. Marcy immediately called Karen and excitedly told her how happy she was. She couldn't believe that this was the same woman he had been married to all these years. The change was so sudden and so complete, I couldn't imagine that her act was so bad that it deserved this, except for killing her lover. Before going to bed, I went out for a hamburger. Of course, the lawn had to be mowed again, so the next day, I had a good excuse to avoid Marcy. Around 11 o'clock, Marcy's mother and father arrived to pick up the kids. I had no idea that a sleepover with relatives was planned, but I decided not to protest. Tomorrow was a school day, and Grandma Wilcox promised they'd be there on time. I couldn't wait to check my phone recorder, but lunch came first since I had skipped breakfast. After a quick shower, I headed to the Denny's. Marcy didn't say a word about me not eating at home anymore. Marcy and Wally had devised a plan to avenge Tony's death. It was all a little comical. I guess if I hadn't known what was going on, it wouldn't have looked that way. After Marcy and I went to bed, Wally was going to enter the house through the sliding door on the back porch. She promised him it would be open. If everything went according to plan, it would look like I'd been shot in an attempted robbery. Marcy and Karen would call 911 if they heard a gunshot. I know it sounds silly, but at that moment I remembered that I hadn't changed the beneficiaries on my insurance policies. On my way out the door, I kissed my wife, Riley, and got the finger in return. I had dinner with my parents and spent the evening there. Before leaving, I borrowed a snake charmer from my father. The .20 caliber short-barreled shotgun would be perfect for an evening party. When I got home, Marcy was already in bed, but her light was on, so I assumed she was reading. The only call on the recorder was from Karen. She was bragging about the good sex she and Wally had had all day. Before saying goodbye, she promised Marcy she'd be ready for tonight. It took me about 20 minutes to replace the buckshot in my cartridges with rock salt. I had a sack full from last winter. I didn't want to kill Wally, just slow him down. Hell, I didn't want to kill Tony either. I hoped Wally didn't have as bad a tick as Tony did. I wanted to check the door to the back porch, but I was afraid Wally would see me. I had to assume that Marcy had left it open. I stripped down to my underwear and rummaged through the blankets on the bed. It would have been nice to have a cup of coffee, but there wasn't any, so I decided to make do with a Coke. I waited, sitting in the chair with my cell phone in hand. He didn't show up until after midnight. As soon as I saw him on the patio, I called 911 and reported that there was an intruder in my house. I was careful to say that I feared for my life. I didn't hang up. The patio door opened silently, and Wally appeared on the doorstep. I waited until he was fully inside and fired the first shot. I aimed for his lower body because I didn't want to accidentally kill the son of a bitch. The first shot sent him tumbling backwards onto the deck. When the second one hit him, he tumbled over the edge of the deck, breaking the railing. I realized I hadn't killed him because he howled like a piglet. The rock salt must have hurt him badly. I was surprised at how loud the shotgun blast sounded in the house. My ears were ringing in my ears like I was delirious. I turned on the light, and within seconds, Marcy was standing in the living room screaming. She was actually screaming out words, but I couldn't understand them. I went over to check on Wally and saw a Ruger 22 automatic with a silencer on the floor. Marcy was still screaming, and I pointed the shotgun in its direction. She quickly shut up and ran out of the room. Looks like Wally broke his ankle in the fall. Some guys are lucky. 10 minutes later, the first black and whites showed up. There was no particular discussion. I lowered the shotgun so there would be no misinterpretation of what was going on. I pressed the phone button, and one of the officers told the 911 operator that everything was under control. They asked who else was in the house, and I told them about Marcy in the bedroom. They took her into the living room and discovered they had made a big mistake. Her mouth was open by a mile. I tried to cover her up, and the cops tried to shut her up. Neither of us succeeded. Finally, a uniformed policewoman took her by the arm and led her outside. I noticed Karen walking with the other neighbors. I smiled at her and slowly ran my index finger down her throat. She turned and walked quickly away without responding to my smile. The ambulance crew arrived for Wally at the same time as Detective Green. He smiled when he saw me, and I smiled broadly back. I wasn't trying to be a smartass, but I couldn't help it. The Amazon cop took Marcy into the house so she could get dressed. She had already calmed down a bit. Once dressed, we all headed back to police headquarters. I insisted on riding in separate cars, so Detective Green let me ride with him. We didn't talk during the ride, but he looked at me and smiled again. By the time Green let me go, it was dawn. We only talked for about 30 minutes, but they kept me up all night. I felt like I was in Guantanamo because they kept making me drink coffee. One of the black and white cars took me home. I was a little disappointed because I was expecting to see yellow tape around the house, but it looked like nothing had happened. The rock salt hadn't even broken the glass door. Apparently, Wally got most of it. I estimated it would take an hour to fix the broken railing. I threw myself into bed and didn't get up until after lunch. After emptying my bladder, I staggered into the kitchen and found my friendly detective sitting at the table, reading the newspaper and drinking freshly brewed coffee, which I realized he had brewed while I slept. I had already had all the coffee I wanted the night before, so I settled for a large glass of orange juice and sat down across from him. I have no idea how he ended up in the house. "You're a great guy, Mr. Mercer." He didn't lift his eyes from the paper. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I stayed silent. I didn't know if he was playing me or not. He finished his coffee. "Detective Green, I need a shower, a shave, and something to eat. My treat, as long as it's not against police policy." "Take your time, Danny. I've got all day." As I headed for the shower, I wondered when he was sleeping. Lunch consisted of 2 large pulled pork sandwiches. Green even saved a beer for me. Neither of us said anything, and after a while, the silence became overwhelming. "You're dying to ask me some questions, aren't you, Mr. Mercer?" "Funny, I was thinking the same thing about you." My detective friend beckoned to the bartender and ordered 2 more beers on tap. "I've been asking you questions all night, now it's your turn." "Well, for starters, where's my wife?" "She's still with us. She'll be arraigned this afternoon." I finished my beer. "Your wife's parents found her a lawyer." This was something I hadn't expected. Now I had hundreds more questions, but the problem was that the more questions I asked, the more I risked exposing myself. I decided it was best to back off. It was good to see that Marcy's family was available to her, because I wasn't going to be there. "I don't have any more questions, Detective Green, but if you feel like talking it out, feel free to start any time." He took a good sip of beer and laughed. Not too loud, but he laughed. "One more thing. You didn't overhear and probably didn't record your wife's conversation with Mr. Williams, did you?" "I assume you mean Wally?" That made me grimace slightly. "If I happen to have such a tape, would you need it?" "I don't know yet. If things go the way I think they will, it won't change anything. But if either of them has a good lawyer, it's possible." "If I had a record like that, wouldn't I be in trouble?" "You're right. I'm just trying to make my job easier. I'll see what I can do without the tape, which may or may not exist." I nodded my thanks. "Danny boy, I think I should take you home. Your kids will be home from school soon and they need their father." We pulled up to the house just as the school bus was dropping Todd and Terry off. They came up to us and I introduced them to my new detective friend. They wanted to see his badge. Things looked pleasant enough until Green leaned forward and said, "So, which one of you built the tugboat and which one of you built the monster truck?" "I built the truck," Todd shouted, puffing up his chest. "I built the tugboat. Would you like to see it?" Terry was just as proud. Maybe I'll get a chance to see them next time. Right now, I have to go. He left me standing there, dumbfounded, and walked to his car with a huge, shit-eating grin on his face. The bastard knew about the pink paint. He had my balls in his hands, and there was nothing I could do about it. That night, we ordered pizza. The boys never asked where their mother was. After dinner, Marcy's father called and said he needed help raising bail money to get her out of jail. I tried to be as polite as possible, but turned him down. I'm not sure he realized what was going on, but at least he was trying to be a good father. I asked him where he was going to stay. He hesitated for a bit and then said he was going to stay with them. The boys and I loaded all of Marcy's stuff into the van and drove them. It didn't cost us anything to pick it all up. When we got home, I saw the U-Haul truck in the driveway of Karen's house. The next morning, it was gone. Marcy never called me. I had to read the newspaper every day to find out what was going on. No one said anything to me. In fact, it was as if I was being left out on purpose. There was no trial. Marcy blamed it on Wally. Wally said it was his idea. In the end, they both pleaded guilty. Marcy got 3 to 5 years for conspiracy to commit murder. Wally got 5 to 10 years for attempted murder. The feds were called in because of the silencer Wally was wearing. They decided to wait until Wally served his first sentence before making changes. Detective Green didn't need the tape and never mentioned it again. Karen disappeared and was never heard from again. My father was happy to get his gun back and promised he would lend it to me again if I needed it. He laughed when he said that. I asked Marcy to serve me with divorce papers as soon as her sentence started. She didn't protest at all. I got the impression she didn't want to hear from me because I hadn't seen or spoken to her since the night I shot Wally. I sold the house and moved back in with my parents. I couldn't work and take care of the kids alone. The guys at work were happy to have me back. For some reason, they offered me to move to the day shift, but I declined. Every month, I took the boys to the women's prison in Muncie to visit their mother. I waited in the car because they were usually there for less than an hour. Sometimes, when the weather was nice, the meetings were outdoors. I could park and watch them through the metal fence. I never asked them about visitors and asked them not to tell me anything. That seemed to suit everyone. Everything seemed to be going smoothly until I got a phone call. Hello, is this Daniel Mercer? Yes. My name is Angela Hawkins. A detective named Darnell Green said I should call you. There's something we need to discuss. I know Detective Green, but why do you want to talk to me? Tony DeMarco was my brother. Oh shit. Just when I thought all that shit was behind me, something like this happened. I don't think this is a good idea. I'm sorry for your loss, but there's nothing I can do to help you. I hung up before he could say anything else. 2 days later, he called back. Daniel, I would really appreciate it if you would come to me. There are some things I need to tell you. Detective Green said you're a reasonable man. Where did you want to meet? I'd prefer to do it at the car dealership, but you can do it anywhere that's convenient for you. It took me a few moments to find something. Meet me Saturday morning at 10 o'clock at the car dealership. I'll bring my 2 sons with me. They love looking at old cars. I didn't know what I meant, but I felt more comfortable in a public place with my kids. I wasn't using them as a shield or anything, but I felt like she'd have less chance of trying anything if they were with me. I had no idea what kind of grudge this woman might hold. If she's Tony's sister, she must be Italian. If she's Italian, she must be hot blood. And if she is hot blood, she must be careful. At this point, I decided I was thinking too much. I needed a beer. I called Detective Green and asked what was going on. He laughed and told me to meet her and stop worrying. It was easy for him to say since he didn't kill his brother. Continental Classics was a large and impressive venue. In addition to the main showroom, they had 2 large buildings in the back where they kept cars that needed restoration or were waiting for a spot in the showroom. I was surprised when we walked into the store and saw that they were having a grand opening. I wasn't expecting that. There were a lot of things I didn't realize. Terry and Todd seemed torn between cars and gifts. My first impression was the smell from the popcorn machine. A guy in rubber-nosed boots was handing out small bags of hot popcorn. To the side was a soda machine and another clown with a hot dog cart. The kids wouldn't have to eat today. It wasn't hard to recognize Angela Hawkins. I knew it as soon as I saw her walking straight toward me with a slow, determined gait. Everything about her said Italian. Dark hair, dark eyes, olive complexion, and wide hips. A gentleman probably wouldn't have noticed her hips, but her height emphasized them. No more than 5 feet. Tony was huge and his sister was short and wide. I felt myself starting to get a little nervous as she stepped closer, and then I noticed a smaller clone next to her. The girl looked to be about 10 years old and was an exact replica of Angela, except her hair was a little lighter and, naturally, she had no hips. My hostess seemed to have her back to herself as much as I did. We were a rather pathetic pair, both of us using our children as guards. As he closed the distance that separated us, his hand reached out in a friendly manner. "Daniel Mercer, I presume?" It felt natural and polite to take his hand and shake it. I've always wanted to say that, like in the movie about Dr. Livingston. She smiled, but seemed a little nervous, and I was a little relieved. I was at a loss for words, so she continued talking. "This is my daughter, Carla." Carla smiled at the boys and me. Todd smiled back politely and called her name, but Terry held out his hand with a smile on his face. "Carla, why don't you show the boys the house while I talk to their father?" Terry immediately followed Carla into the demonstration area, while Todd headed toward the hot dog stand. I took that as a good sign. "We can talk down here, downstairs or upstairs in my office. Your choice?" I think the office would be fine. Those were the first words out of my mouth. As we walked towards the stairs leading to the elevated office, I noticed a few of the staff glancing in my direction and commenting on each other. Angela noticed too and smiled at my discomfort. All of the vendors on the floor were wearing blue bowling shirts for the occasion of the opening, so they were easy to spot. Unfortunately, they all seemed more interested in me than the customers. One guy at the back of the building smiled broadly and gave me a thumbs up. I smiled back but felt a little nervous. "Did Detective Green say anything to you about my situation?" I didn't answer anything. I just shook my head no. "I don't want to bore you with my life story, but I think you need to know a little. Tony was my brother and my only relative. There are no other relatives. When Tony died, he didn't have a will. Since I was the only relative, I inherited his business. The executor took a good share, but I still got more than I expected." I was glad someone had benefited from the whole mess. While she was explaining it to me, I noticed that she wore an ear piercing and a wedding ring. She had a small silver cross hanging around her neck, but it was hard to see it because my gaze kept wandering to her cleavage. I was starting to remember how long it had been since I'd had sex when she interrupted me. "Mr. Mercer, are you paying attention?" It was a trick question. He smiled as he asked it. "I'm sorry, I was just admiring your crucifix." She was telling me to just look her in the eye and pay attention when she slapped my arm. "Do you want a beer?" "That would be nice." There was a mini fridge next to the table, and she had to bend over to get the drinks. One moment I was forced to look at her cleavage, and the next moment I realized she had a beautiful ass staring me in the face. She didn't explain anything to me. She was just trying to seduce me. It may not have been on purpose, but it worked wonders. He opened the tab and handed me the can, trying not to bend over. We drank a few glasses each without saying anything. "Well, Mrs. Hawkins, I'm glad things went well for you, but I'm not sure why I'm here. I need to get back to the boys before they start to worry." "It would be better if you called me Angela, but can I call you Danny?" "Sure, are we done?" "Hell no. Sit here and don't move until I'm done. Detective Green said you'd understand." I didn't answer. If I'd kept my mouth shut, this would have been over faster. Tony was a bastard. He wasn't a good son of a bitch and he deserved to die. Oddly enough, I wanted to thank you. It was a trap. The damn detective had set me up. Was the room bugged, or did she have a bug? Probably a bug hidden in her bra. Shit. I looked at her cleavage again. "Do you have a microphone or any kind of recording device?" "Of course not. Why would I need something like that?" I finished my beer, though I still wasn't convinced. I'd better go downstairs and see what the guys are up to. I wouldn't want them to get in trouble. "Just sit down." She seemed utterly convinced of this. There was no love lost between Tony and me. About 3 years ago, my husband was killed in an accident. He didn't have life insurance, and the person who hit him didn't have insurance. I was left without a job and had to raise my daughter. Tony was my only relative, and I asked him for help. He paid part of my husband's funeral expenses, and that was the end of it. He wouldn't even return my calls. "So you're saying his death was a blessing to you?" Yes, and apparently for you too. Sabay. Maybe we should both be grateful for what happened and leave it at that. Angela smiled and finished her beer. You don't want to talk about it anymore, do you? I nodded and started to rise from my chair. I need you to do me a favor. You're the only one who can help me. What can I do for you? I want you to come over to work for me as a general manager. You're out of your mind. I don't know anything at all about the automobile business, especially luxury cars like you have over there. I know. I have people who deal in that sort of thing. What do you need me for? Angela seemed a little nervous. She looked at her feet, then at the walls. Her eyes darted back and forth as she tried to formulate a few words. Did you see the way my men looked at you when you came up to the office with me? Yes, they didn't smile. Everyone thinks you killed Tony. Not only did you kill him, but you made him a laughingstock. Everyone was afraid of Tony. Now it seems they're afraid of you. Their fear is akin to respect. Do you understand what I'm trying to say? They don't respect you. No. They'll rip me off left and right, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it. I'm not smart enough or tough enough to keep them in line. What's in it for you? Mostly just being here. After a while, we'll both know the business well enough to be able to control what happens. In the meantime, I need you to intimidate them. I'm a good guy, Angela. That's why Tony and my wife have been trying to take advantage of me. She looked a little calmer now. That didn't work out too well for them, did it? For some odd reason, I found that funny, and I laughed a little. For the next 30 minutes, Angela and I discussed terms. She didn't mind the salary and benefits I was getting at the factory. If things didn't work out, I could always come back. I didn't really want to go back. I wanted things to get better. When we got back downstairs, Todd wasn't looking his best. Too many hot dogs and too many sodas. Terry, on the other hand, was having a great time. He seemed to spend more time talking to Carla than looking at cars. That was a good sign. On the way home, Todd threw up in the truck and missed dinner. I started work that Monday. It went exactly as Angela had predicted. I was surprised at how quickly I was able to get up to speed with the job. I approached some of the employees and soon I had eyes and ears in the plant. The one in the blue shirt who smiled broadly at me on my first day was Glenn's cousin, my biggest supporter. Most of the employees wanted the business to thrive and were willing to give away the bad apples. Angela let me handle the layoffs, and I realized I loved it. I was living up to my reputation. Detective Green stopped by for coffee with me a few times, but the conversation was usually light and friendly. Finally, I got him to open up a little. 3 years ago, I was working as a police officer in Philadelphia. I came home one day and found my wife lying in bed with my supervisor. I beat the crap out of him on the spot and kicked my wife out. The police department gave me a choice: resign or be fired. A week later, I got a job here. Before I left, I made sure the son of a bitch who was dating my wife left too. I didn't ask him for details. That was his business. At least I understood why he seemed to be leaning toward my side. The boys agreed not to mention my new job to their mother on visitation days. They made a few remarks about the long drive, but seemed to realize there was no getting away from it. I felt it was important for Marcy to see her kids, not for their sake, but to give me a chance to pour salt on the wounds. I know. It's a horrible way to use my kids, but it gave me a small amount of pleasure. Angela and I started spending more time together, at work and after work. One weekend, the boys insisted that I take her and Carla to Noble Grove. Mostly we stayed closer to home. Living together seemed to complicate any possibility of a romantic relationship. I was interested in a closer relationship with Angela, but it was uncomfortable. I was still living in my parents' house with the kids, and Angela and Carla had a small studio apartment. Since things were going much better than expected, Angela started talking about looking for a house to buy. She spent a lot of time on the computer looking for the perfect one. I was first wary when she explained why she wanted a 4-bedroom house. Danny, I think it's important that the kids have their own room. Better to take care of it now than to have to do it all over again later, don't you agree? Of course, I quickly realized that the question was a trick question. I also realized that Angela sensed in me something more than just an employee. The potential for romance was looking better and better. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I also think it would be a good idea to consider separate bedrooms. I don't like them being too close to the master bedroom. I walked out of the study right after I said that and noticed a small smile on his face. It was a weird relationship. We never had sex. We never even came close to it. We hadn't even kissed, but I felt closer to her than I had to Marcy in the last 12 years. 2 days later, when my divorce from Marcy was final, we all went to Red Lobster to celebrate. The kids didn't know the reason for the party, but Angela did. Later, back at the apartment, the kids were watching a movie on pay-per-view when Angela cornered me in the kitchen and stood on tiptoe to kiss me. We hugged and laughed a little when Carla walked into the room. "Oh, sorry, Mom." Turning to leave, she added, "Just in time." When we returned to the living room, Carla was whispering in Terry's ear and they were both smiling. The rest of the night, Angela and I acted as normal, but I was looking forward to whatever it was. The next day, while the kids were at school, Angela and I took a long lunch and went back to the apartment. We both had a lot of energy. We didn't get back to work until just before lights out. There were many more long lunches after that, and Angela began to seriously consider looking for a house. Detective Green stopped by regularly, mostly just to chat, but occasionally he would look at the cars. He fell in love with a Studebaker Hawk that belonged to movie critic Roger Ebert. Angela offered him a good price. "Danny, I need you to drive me to Marcy's." It was an unexpected request. The boys and I traveled less often than we used to, but Marcy never complained. Any particular reason? Closure. I need closure. I'd never understood what that meant. I knew all the words to describe it, but the concept itself seemed to elude me. "Do you want me to come with you?" "Just take me there. You don't have to be with me when I talk to her." It was a warm, sunny fall day when we arrived in Muncie. Inmate visits were held outside, so I parked by the fence. 10 minutes later, Marcy and Angela came out to the exercise yard and sat at one of the tables. They chatted and smiled like they were long-lost friends. After 5 minutes, things got interesting. The smile had disappeared from Marcy's face. She was now leaning on the picnic table and frowning at her guest. Angela, on the other hand, still looked happy. Suddenly, Marcy pounced on the table and tried to grab her. Several security guards quickly foiled the attempt and, kicking and screaming, led my ex-wife back into the building. Angela turned around, looked at me, smiled and shrugged before leaving the visiting area. She was still smiling as she walked back to the car. "What the hell was that?" "Your ex-wife sure is a touchy bitch." Angela seemed to giggle to herself. We drove for a few miles, then she turned slightly, straining her seatbelt. I introduced myself, and she seemed pleased to see me. Everything was fine as long as she thought I was on her side. I'll admit I fooled her a little at first. "What do you mean?" I told her I was coming up from Baltimore to get my revenge. That cheered her up, because she thought I meant you. Of course, what I really meant was that I was going to get even with Tony by taking over his business. "But you can get revenge on a dead man, can't you?" "Okay, but why was he so angry?" "He wanted details, when, where, and how. Of course, I knew he meant you." Now I was getting curious. I told her it would take a long time and asked if she wanted me to keep her informed of the progress. She enthusiastically agreed and insisted on knowing exactly how I planned to do it. When I told her how I was going to do it, she got angry. She freaked out. She was freaking out. It was glorious. Okay. How the hell are you going to kill me?" "Okay. How the hell are you going to kill me? Now I want to know." Her smile grew even wider. I told him I was going to screw you to death. "That's it?" "Yes, funny, isn't it? I thought he might get mad, but there's no way I expected that to happen." For a few moments, everyone was silent. We were both smiling. I was very proud of her. "When do you plan on starting this round?" "As soon as we get to the next motel, silly." 2 months later, Angela and I were married. It was a small ceremony in the backyard of our new home. Angela sent Marcy a wedding invitation with a little note inside. "Everything is going according to plan. He should be dead in 40 or 50 years. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. So subscribe to my channel and watch the next video."